Regtech for 6-year-olds. Everything you want to know about Regtech, but just didn't ask.
This is Regtech for 6-year-olds. Straight talking at the intersection between regulation and technology. My name is Danny Lawlor, and if you're new to our YouTube channel, do hit the subscribe button. Likewise, if you like the video, don't be shy about hitting the like button below as well. This episode is our Regtech Explainer episode, and I'm delighted to be joined by Joanne Horgan, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Vizor Software, and who's going to explain to us in 5 minutes or less what it is that Regtech is, what it does. Thanks very much for joining us, Joanne. Let's start with what Regtech is. How do you define Regtech?
I define Regtech as the application of technology for the purpose of meeting regulatory requirements. So it's quite broad. It can be anything from, looking at regulatory reporting, looking at fraud and anti-money laundering applications, but basically any way that you use technology to increase the efficiency or reduce the cost of your regulatory compliance.
So it is quite different than Fintech then, because I think a lot of people would see or maybe assume that Regtech is a subset of Fintech and Readable, but actually they're not the same at all.
No, I think Fintech is quite different. Fintech is looking at the application of technology for maybe for new financial services or maybe allowing new business models for financial services companies. Whereas, as I said, regulatory technology or Regtech is really more about helping you with your regulatory compliance and looking at how you comply with your regulatory requirements. So they are quite different. I would see them as different.
So you might think of something like Revolut or some of the digital banks as being a real application of Fintech.
Fintech, yeah.
Before.
Exactly, yeah. I think broadly the technology part can be the same, and I think the reason some of these buzzwords have come up is maybe to allow people to differentiate a little bit. So Regtech itself isn't new. People have been using technology for years. There's regulatory requirements that you simply couldn't do by paper. Years and years ago, for 20 years, we've been in this broad space of technology in the area of regulatory compliance and regulatory reporting for quite a long time. And I think it's probably only in the last few years that these buzzwords, I would say, have come about, and they're really to allow people maybe to separate the use of technology in different ways. So, you hear of Regtech, even in the business we're in, where we would typically deal with central banks. It's called Subtech, and it's the application of that same technology maybe for supervisory purposes. But this, the buzzwords, I think people shouldn't be scared by them. They are typically underneath a lot of the same technologies being used. And it's just using these words maybe allows people to differentiate the application of that technology.
So you can kind of understand what the business line is or the business area is of that particular company if they say they're Subtech or Regtech or Fintech, but actually the technology that underlies them is quite similar. We'll come to that in a second. But in terms of Regtech then specifically, so it's really about helping regulated firms to be more efficient in the way that they comply and demonstrate compliance with regulatory obligations. So what kind of areas does that apply to then? I guess reporting is a big one.
Yeah, regulatory reporting would be quite a big one. That would be the area, I guess, that we're most familiar with. But everything from anti-money laundering, looking at other areas as well. There's even compliance and governance more broadly, looking at governance as well. There's quite a lot of technology applied there. I think if you look at regulatory reporting as an example, and you thought of somebody who maybe years ago, or maybe still today, some people are still using Excel to list and gather their regulatory requirements. They're using that to pull numbers together, for example, check those numbers before they submit them to the regulator. And sure, that's maybe a type of technology, but I think what we're seeing now is the demands even of regulators have grown, where they expect auditability and traceability and more levels of, I would say, automation and less manual adjustments and manual tasks that people do, because sometimes with that the human side of it, there can be error obviously introduced, and also maybe you lack some of that traceability then of what happens to data as it gets reported.
Yeah, I guess there's a few things that have come together to really push Regtech to the front the way that it is. You're right, the regulators' demands are higher. And by using technology, then hopefully you're kind of removing human error and reducing the risks in regulated firms, which is what regulators are always keen to do. But on top of that, you have more requirements. You have much more sophisticated rule books and regulations that you're required to comply with, but allied to a regime that puts more emphasis on compliance and on sanctioning individuals and firms if they go awry. So it's not enough if you're in a leadership position to say, well, the rule book was 1,000 pages long. How am I supposed to comply with everything? The rules are there. The regulator expects you to comply, and really Regtech facilitates that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you look at that example of rule books that are thousands of pages long, I think Regtech it is being used both by regulators and the regulated entities, and where we see Regtech really can help in that example, where previously or even today still a lot of firms are doing this. You would have had to literally go line by line through some of those rule books and try to figure out what applied to you. Some of the applications today of Regtech are trying to make those rule books machine readable, trying to make them ingestible by different technologies, different firms, so that you no longer necessarily have to go through and pull it out into Excel and try and figure out what applies to you. There should be, where there are rules that are truly rule based, I would say, rather than principles based regulations, it is possible for a machine to do that and automate a lot of that for you.
Absolutely. And our next video, we're going to talk about some of the problems that Regtech solves. I don't want to ruin the surprise there. Maybe let's wrap this one up, but just briefly, what are the technologies that underpin Regtech? And as you said, that you probably find them in other technology solutions, like in the Fintech and in the subtech area as well.
Yeah, I think some of them, artificial intelligence and machine learning would be a technology that's used quite broadly. Lots of different applications of that, which again maybe we won't get into today. Big data and analytics, looking at data. There's some applications for blockchain, for example, which again is another buzzword people might have heard. And then just I would call it more technology that probably we're using a lot more these days. So even just cloud computing and things like that are quite broadly used as well.
So there we wrap up this explainer episode of Regtech for 6-year-olds. I think in summary there are 5 key takeaways. 1. Regtech exists to enable regulated firms to meet regulatory obligations. 2. Regtech drives efficiency and reduces costs. 3. Regtech can be seen across several distinct categories, including compliance, risk management and control, regulatory reporting, and transaction monitoring. Number 4. Technologies that drive Regtech today include cloud, blockchain, application program interface, machine learning, big data, data mining and analytics, predictive analytics, smart contracts, and even visualization solutions. And finally, number 5, examples of Regtech applied today include making rulebooks machine readable, monitoring transactions for compliance with market abuse regulations, and even monitoring for suspicious transactions under anti-money laundering regulations. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this explainer episode of Regtech for 6-year-olds. If you have, hit the like button below. If you're not already a subscriber to the Aquest YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button and you'll be kept up to date with all of our content. Till the next time, thanks very much for watching Regtech for 6-year-olds.